Hello and welcome to the In the Tank podcast episode. I messed it up already because I'm your fill-in host, Jim Lakely. This is episode number 242 of the In the Tank podcast, and I was going to have Isaac Orr do the intro because he does such a great Donnie impression. So maybe we can do take two. Give it a shot, Isaac.
Hello and welcome to the In the Tank podcast. This is episode, who cares? It's been, nobody knows what time it is. With me today, we have editorial executive. Oh, whoops, I got it wrong. Just as always, Justin T. Haskins. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing very well, Isaac. How are you?
I am just fantastic. Also with me today is Vice President and Communications Director of the Heartland Institute, Mr. Big Jim Lakely. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing very well, Fake Donnie. Thank you so much for asking. But thank you for your fine work there, Isaac. Very good. I'm sure Donnie will appreciate it. He is indisposed today. He's not able to make the show, and so I'm going to do a very poor job of trying to fill in for him. But, for the last several shows, we have purposely avoided talking about COVID for 2 weeks. It's just what everyone else is talking about. If you want to check out our other two episodes, they were on two very good discussions about the movie Planet of the Humans.
Well, it was just such a great documentary. We had to devote two episodes to it. It was fantastic.
It was. So if you're a subscriber to this podcast, you'll see that those are there. If you haven't listened to them yet, please listen to them. You can also watch them on YouTube as well. But we have to talk about COVID again, but especially how these lockdowns are destroying liberty in this country, and for what appears to be very little benefit. If you see countries like Sweden have not locked down their economies, and they are not experiencing the level of death and destruction and devastation that was predicted. So there's a lot we're learning about this, and there just seems that there are too many governors in America these days, and even Americans that seem very okay with having our liberties severely restricted, and they're just fine with it and having that happen indefinitely. So guys, let's just we can open it up. How has so far, since we haven't talked about COVID for 2 weeks, how are you guys holding up with all these shutdowns? Justin, you live now in North Carolina. Isaac, you live in Minnesota, and I live here in Illinois. I think I probably have it worse. I think Illinois is locked down more draconian, with more draconian rules than any other states, just maybe outside of New York. So, Justin, how are things there in North Carolina? Are you any more free than most Americans?
No, probably not. I live in. I've mentioned this before on the podcast. Although I live in North Carolina, which you would think would qualify as real America, I happen to live in the most liberal left-wing part of North Carolina, a place that I can't remember which election. If it was either the 2012 or the 2016 election, I can't remember which one. But in one of those elections, it actually, in the county I lived in, had a higher percentage vote for the Democratic Party presidential candidate than Chicago did. So, it's that liberal here. It's very, very far to the left.
Are you in Asheville?
I'm not in Asheville. I'm not going to tell people where I live. That's not a smart thing to do.
Come on, Justin.
But there's a Duke banner behind.
There's a Duke banner behind it, so that should give some of it away. It's a very left-wing part of the country. It's full of college students and professors and people from the Northeast who have moved down here. When you walk down the street and you just run into people, the vast majority of them are not from here. They're actually from the Northeast. So there's tons of Northeast liberals here as well. And so, it's pretty stringent. Everything is shut down. You can go to the grocery store, obviously, and things like that, but you have to wear a mask everywhere you go. You can't go into any buildings without a mask. The grocery store at the Whole Foods that's nearby actually has a police officer stationed out in front of it to make sure that they're only letting in the right number of people at the Whole Foods. So, it's armed and everything.
Oh man, that's such a Whole Foods thing to do.
Yeah, it really is. So
it's so left, it's right. It's ridiculous.
It's pretty, a lot of stuff is locked down. You can still go outside and walk around, and I don't see people really taking it too seriously in public places and things like that. But the rules are very strict here. It's just, I don't think that people are necessarily following them. I don't know if that's the case where you guys are, but here it's other than when they have to. I feel like generally speaking, life has kind of gone on. I will say this, they did open the farmers market nearby, which was a big thing. They had shut it down. They had shut down the farmers market for months, which I thought was really ironic because they let you go to the grocery store, but they won't let you go to the farmers market, which is just a grocery store outside, which you would think would be better than the grocery store inside. Then we go to the farmers market, right? And they don't, even though it's outside, they like roped it off so that it was like a straight line. So you couldn't just walk up to it, and you had to go wait in line. And then to enter into the area where the vendors were, you had to go, you had to wash your hands with water. They had water, like coolers. You had to wash your hands with these coolers before you could go into the farmer's market. And then the worst part of it was, because it was like a line, like a, you know, it wasn't a straight line, but it was a line. You couldn't go back once you went forward. Like, so once you get to a vendor, you could not go back to a previous vendor behind you. You had to just keep going. And if you wanted to go back to a previous vendor, you had to go back out, get back in line again, and wait to do the whole thing over again. So, I mean, that's totally insane. So at least they opened it. That's something, I guess. But then the rules were just completely nuts.
So when is Freedom Day in North Carolina? When did they end the lockdown? Is there some kind of timeline?
Well, it was May 1st, and then they extended it, I think, to today was when they had extended it to, and now I don't know what it is. Because the truth is, the town that I live in here, they put all these rules into place before the state did anything. So it almost doesn't matter what the state does, because the city will probably keep these rules in place for much longer than whatever the state does, because of course, like I said before, it's a very left-wing place, and that's the sort of thing that they do. So who knows how much longer this is going to go on here. I'll probably have it just as bad as you have it in Illinois. Now the difference is I could go 2 towns over and it probably won't be like that. But here it'll probably be like this for at least another month or so, I would guess.
All right, Isaac, how's it for you up there in Minnesota? My observations suggest that maybe it's not that much better than here in the lockdown state of Illinois.
I don't think it is. Like the health department said, a drive-in movie theater could not operate here, and even Illinois is allowing that stuff. So yeah, it's bad. I think what's happening now is that these lockdowns are kind of a tactic in search of a strategy, and I am the founder. For all of you watching, you'll get the joke. And yeah, so I think that, frankly, the elected officials here said that 74,000 people could die if we don't do something, and they're still saying like 22,000 people might die if we don't keep social distancing, which is not in line with where we're at. We're at 508 deaths in the state, so it's kind of a huge jump from 508 to 22,000. So they've kind of painted themselves into a corner, and I don't think there's an easy way to get out of it. So I think that they're just kind of doing the same thing, because otherwise they're going to look really stupid for all the damage that they've inflicted. But the problem with that is, if you can't admit that maybe you weren't right, there's no way you can get right. So it's going to be, beatings will continue until morale improves.
Yeah. Well, not every state are like Illinois or Minnesota. One state that you would expect to start rebelling against these things is the state of Texas. And news this week, a formerly anonymous, unknown hair salon owner named Shelley Luther in Dallas, she was arrested for refusing to stay locked down. She employed some I saw her on an interview last night, some 19 hairdressers work in her shop. They were running out of money. They had to feed their kids. They needed some kind of revenue. So she decided to open up her shop and let them come in and safely cut the hair of customers. So she was arrested. And then she was put before a judge by the name of Eric Moyer, who sentenced her to a week in jail and $7,000 fine, because those were the 7 days she was open and she refused to close. And so he was going to put her behind bars for 7 days plus have a $7,000 fine. But she could avoid jail time if she bent the knee and publicly apologized to the elected officials of her community for defying their order. In fact, defiling their order by ripping it in half outside the front of her shop. And so to her credit, she refused to bend the knee. And as it turned out, Thursday, a day before this podcast, the Texas Supreme Court ordered her release from jail, which is good. But I think it's important to show what is happening to this country as far as liberty and freedom is concerned, that we have people in positions of power, a lot of them elected positions. This judge was elected, a Democrat, and they have gone absolutely overboard with trying to control the lives of what were 2 months ago a free people. So Andy, I know we have the clip here. I think it's really important for us to watch and listen to this clip and the tone of voice of this judge who stated this. This was his statement demanding that she bend the knee and apologize.
That you now see the error of your ways and understand that the society cannot function where one's own belief in a concept of liberty permits you to flaunt your disdain for the rulings of duly elected officials. That you owe an apology to the elected officials whom you disrespected by flagrantly ignoring and in one case defiling their orders, which you now know obviously apply to you. That you understand that the proper way in which in an ordered society to engage concerns which you may have had is to hire a lawyer and advocate for change, an exception or an amendment to laws that you find offensive. That you publicly state that this is the way that citizens in the state should behave. And that you represent to this court that you will today cease operation of your salon and not reopen until after further orders of the government permit you to do so. This court will consider the payment of a fine in lieu of the incarceration which you've demonstrated that you have so clearly earned. Is there anything that you would like to say?
Now, she did have something to say. She didn't say "go to hell," which is what she probably should have said. But Justin, you're our socialism scholar here, you know, and I'm old enough to remember the Soviet Union and what they did back there. I mean, I mean, this is Soviet stuff. I mean, here we have a man in authority telling a citizen to apologize publicly, and it's to humiliate her, so her humiliation will be a lesson to others. And this is just about as un-American a thing as I can ever even imagine. Totalitarian regimes in history and even today have this key characteristic where they, you know, it's a strategy to control the people. It's humiliation, it's intimidation, and then ultimately it's violence. This is so un-American. Justin, what the hell is happening to this country?
Whoa, Jim, this is a family show.
Yeah, Jim.
Let's keep
It's
that
a family
HE
show.
double hockey sticks in your pocket.
Okay.
This is what happens when Donnie's not here. This becomes X-rated, this show.
Donald, come back soon.
Yeah. So look, I on the one hand, I agree that if you're going to protest a law that you believe is wrong, you should have to, you should follow the proper channels for doing that, generally speaking. Okay. So I do think that if you reject a law, you shouldn't just, walk outside and, just in this case, keep your business open because you don't think the law is a good law. I mean, the rule of law is necessary. You need to have that and you need to follow the proper channels. I mean, the left is the one that's always violating laws all the time and saying they don't care. They're the ones shutting down cities and destroying personal property because they don't like, like Antifa and stuff like that, because they don't like, some speaker going to a college campus that they disagree with. There are all sorts of times when the left has done this and we've criticized them. And so I think it is important to follow the proper channels. I agree with that. However, the idea that we, the people, should have to apologize to the government, I think is laughable and ridiculous. The idea that you should have to go to prison for keeping your business open, I think is also insane, or for not apologizing to elected officials or whatever the actual reason was for that, I think is totally insane. And I think shows the authoritarian streaks that exist within many of these people who believe that, they're in this exalted status and that you should bow down to them. And that if you just, kiss the ring and beg for forgiveness, then they'll go easier on them. And if not, then they're going to punish you as extremely as they possibly can. I think that it does show that there's an authoritarian streak in many of these people in government. And I don't think that that's surprising at all. That's been the case forever. And I would go a step further and say that this is a good example of why so many people, regular folks, hate the government, why so many people believe that there are essentially two systems of justice in this country, why so many people were angry, really, really angry about Hillary Clinton and what happened with her. This woman has spent more days in jail than Hillary Clinton did, even though we know Hillary Clinton violated all kinds of laws, much more serious laws. That Hillary Clinton, her actions resulted in potential security violations of classified information that may have been captured by foreign entities. This lady just kept her hair salon open when she wasn't supposed to.
So you don't think she should have done that?
It's like, I don't think that. I think that she should have sued the government.
No,
I think that she should have protested,
absolutely.
Perhaps, but I don't think
that
you should openly violate laws that you disagree with.
God, Justin, do you disagree with the Boston Tea Party then? Do you think that we should have just written more letters to King George? Like, you're such an un-American person.
Well, the difference, of course.
You would have been a loyalist.
Well, I would not say that. The difference,
yes, you would.
The difference, of course, is that there was no democratic way to protest the government's actions during the Revolutionary War. That was the whole point. No taxation without representation. That was the whole concept of it. They didn't have any representative government. That's one of the reasons they were so mad. Here, there is recourse. If you don't like this, protest to your government to have them change the laws.
Okay, Justin, let Isaac get in here. Go ahead, Isaac.
So, Justin, let me get this straight. The salon owner that opened up because they don't have any money is supposed to hire a lawyer and go through this long, protracted legal process in order to get her say, right? Is that what you're suggesting? A person that has no money has some sort of actual recourse in determining whether this law is still in effect? Because I just don't think that is legit. I don't think that you can say, oh, yeah, well, in reality, you had some actual recourse. The only real recourse you have in these instances is to not follow laws that don't make sense. And
but by that logic, you have anarchy, right? So if everybody just decides, well, I'm not going to follow the laws that I think make no sense, then every conservative in America will stop following virtually every law that exists, because libertarians believe most laws are garbage and that we shouldn't have them, and most regulations are unnecessary, and most taxes are unnecessary, and whatever.
So, Justin, do you always go the speed limit? Do you always go the speed limit, or do you cheat? I'm sure there are many times when I violate the speed limit, but if I get a ticket, sometimes, sure, yeah. And when I do, if I get fined, I understand that that's a consequence of me violating the law. Do you thank the police officer for writing you a ticket? Do you lick his boots?
Do I thank him? No.
Yeah,
and if I was her,
thank you so much for giving me the speeding ticket when I was going 5 miles over.
Isaac, here the point here is that she was told by a judge, an elected judge, that she must apologize, not even to him, but to the elected officials in her community that have decided that in an open-ended way, her business must be closed, and she has to apologize for opening it up and trying to get back to some kind of income for herself and her employees. It is un-American to force somebody, for a judge to sit up there on that bench and tell an American citizen, a free person, that you have to apologize for breaking the law. You have to apologize for violating this open-ended and in arguably unconstitutional order that you have to close your business. You have to apologize or I'm putting you in jail.
Yeah, Justin, there's no due process for this, right?
That's the problem.
I totally disagree with.
I'm very disappointed.
I totally disagree with all of that.
So you don't think that this is like an unjustified takings without just compensation? You think that this is totally legit? Like, you don't think that the government has to make this right or provide some sort of reasoning beyond the fact that, oh, well, we just think that there's this like terrible virus, so therefore everybody's closed and just deal with it.
You can make the argument that it's wrong. You could make the argument that it's an immoral law. You could make the argument that if you wanted to say it's an unjustified takings, I don't know if I necessarily buy that, but maybe it is. Let's say
You're
it is.
depriving people of making a livelihood.
Sure. Yeah, but you're not depriving them of property. So that's not a takings.
Okay,
I
so
would
do you
imagine
not think that your labor is your property? Because you own your
property,
time.
no.
You own your time. Your time is your property.
Yeah, but it's balanced
but
it's balanced by, obviously, it's not as though they just did this out of thin air. It's balanced by a perceived public health crisis, right? And that's how they're balancing those two things. And the reality is that the reality is that when they created this country, there was a great deal of latitude given to local and state governments to make laws that reflect the will of the people in those communities. And that the Constitution was never intended ever to protect you from your local government. That happened way later. That was something that was
now, baby.
Well, but only in certain cases, not in all cases. So by look, if your position is that this is unconstitutional, if that's your position, then what's the point of the 10th Amendment then? Can you explain that? Because the 10th Amendment says that states are given all of these different rights, right? That they're reserved these rights that are not expressly given to the federal government by the Constitution. It's reserved to the states. That's what it says, and to the people. So if that's the case, then that means the states should have a lot of latitude in how they exercise their various powers over commerce within the state, over public gatherings, over all sorts of different things. That is absolutely what the founding fathers would have believed in. And in fact, they punished people much more harshly than what you're describing.
So question, did you just cry when you read Atlas Shrugged? Like, were you mad at John Galt?
No, I didn't cry.
Yes, you did. God, you were the worst.
Look.
Individual.
How do you under your Isaac under your way of looking at the world, you have anarchy. Everybody
no.
Absolutely, because everyone will just say this law is a racist law or this law is a bigoted law.
It's not a law. That is the big difference here, Justin.
Yes,
you are not acknowledging it. It is not a law. It's an order from the governor.
That's a law.
In a state of emergency that is open-ended and will never end. There has been an enormous power grab and has been completely out of proportion to what is necessary to keep us safe and to keep us from getting sick. We're not going to be able to stop from getting sick. These lockdowns were to flatten the curve so that our hospitals were not overrun. And now they've decided, all these governors, all blue state governors have decided, you know what? Forget that goal. I have other goals, which I will not even define for you. And these are enormous violations of our civil rights and our protections in the Constitution. Look, there was a good piece by David Marcus in the Federalist, and he had said, I'm going to read it. Oh, I know. You just got me going, Justin. You do that. But he wrote this. He said, let's look down the list of rights that are currently being denied by the state to the vast majority of Americans. Most may not leave their houses except for essential travel, whatever that means. Most may not operate their businesses, like Shelley Luther in Texas. Most may not attend church or even host small gatherings in their homes. Most may not receive even potentially life-saving medical procedures such as cancer screenings. Whether one supports or opposes the lockdown, this deprivation of rights is unprecedented in modern history. That is absolutely 100% correct. And the justification for this was that we were going to reduce the strain on the hospitals, which we have done. This COVID-19 is very communicable. It can be very dangerous for people who are older. Almost the majority of illnesses and deaths, I should say, definitely deaths in most states, are in nursing homes or other long-term care facilities. The proper the proper constitutional freedom protecting way to handle that is to concentrate on protecting the people in the vulnerable populations in the vulnerable locations. Instead, these governors for 2 months now have decided to imprison all of their subjects in their states, in their homes indefinitely with no real plans to open them up. Justin or Isaac, you're laughing, and so you can go ahead and make fun of me getting upset.
Torn in the middle here. Like, I think Justin's just wrong. Justin, what if they said you couldn't pray? Like, what if they said Christianity is illegal? Turn in your Bibles. It's the law of the land. Would you do it?
No, because it's obviously not the law of the land.
No.
It's not the same thing at all.
This is my hypothetical, Justin.
It's not the same thing.
No,
it is not, because that's obvious. It's overtly unconstitutional. There is nothing overtly unconstitutional about closing down business in the state of an emergency. And Jim is wrong. It is a law. The law is very clearly, there is a law that the Texas legislature passed that said in a state of emergency, the governor has the power to do X, Y, and Z. And this falls within that law. That's the whole point. It is, in fact, a law. You may not like that it's a law. You may think that it's a bad law. You might think that it gives the governor too much power. That may all be true, but it's still the law. That's still the law. And it doesn't conflict with unless it conflicts with some other law, which is what Isaac's point is. He's saying, well, what if they said you can't pray? And the governor says the state of emergency, you're not allowed to pray anymore, except that would violate a different law. Therefore, you can't it's an illegal law. That's the whole point.
Justin, in Illinois, Justin, in Illinois, J.B. Pritzker said you can't go to church. And
that's right.
So that's not a violation of your First Amendment constitutional rights to freedom of religion, your freedom to practice as you see fit. You're okay with that. You're okay with Governor J.B. Pritzker indefinitely until he says so. You can't go to church until he says so. That's okay with you because he has the power to do it under an emergency that will never end until he says
We're talking about totally different things again. Now we're talking about something that may violate a different law. See, you guys are conflating these two issues as though they're the same thing. They're not. The idea, on the one hand, you're talking about religious liberty, which there is a law that protects your religious liberty. On the other hand, you're talking about closing down a salon, and there is no law that says that you get to have your salon open under a state of emergency. So you guys are conflating two totally different issues here. They're not the same situation. And legally, if the governor says you can't go to church and you think that's a violation of the state of Illinois' constitution or the federal constitution, protection for religious liberty, then you go to court and you file a lawsuit, and that's how you protest it. Or you get a bunch of people together and you protest the law and try to get them to change it, or you elect new people into power. There's all sorts of different ways to try to change it besides just saying, I'm just not going to listen to this law.
You're doing some jujitsu there too.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
How?
Like, if you don't think the law is good, you should be able to ignore it. And you don't believe that. So
no, I don't believe that, because you can't have a functioning society.
What if they changed the Constitution to not protect civil or religious liberty?
That's
then you
their
wouldn't
right.
have.
That's their. If they change the Constitution, then that becomes the law. So
yeah, so
that is the law.
Then it would be totally fine. Like, you would
I'm not
be
saying
in the wrong for continuing to practice.
I'm not saying it would be the law. Look, I'm not saying that.
What if it was the law? Would you follow it?
Would I follow it if they passed a constitutional amendment that changed the First Amendment? That's what you're asking?
Don't try to downplay it in terms of like the likelihood of that happening. But what if it happened? Let's just say that happened. Would you follow it?
Would I? What specifically are you referring to? Like, I wouldn't be allowed to pray? I mean, what do you? I mean, you have to be more specific.
Let's just say this is communist China. You're not allowed to have a Bible. You're not allowed to meet. You're not allowed to do any of that stuff.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What would you do?
I think it would be time for a revolution.
Oh, wait.
That's what I think.
Kind of like, that's a much more extreme form.
Yeah, it is. Because I think it's a much more
salon anyway.
It's a much more extreme violation of your individual liberty than saying that in the middle of a public health crisis, you can't have your salon open. That's not that. I'm sorry, but although that is a violation of her liberty without question, there is also no question whatsoever that it is within the bounds of the laws in Texas. The idea that that is somehow illegal, unless there's some kind of case law that would dispute this, it is 100% legal. Okay, so it's not an illegal action. Okay, she's the one engaging in illegal activities. Now, that does not mean that it's a good law.
It's
just
civil
means that it
disobedience,
is
man.
the law. So by that logic, then, Isaac, anyone, anywhere, anytime can say, you know what? I don't want to pay my taxes anymore because it goes to stuff that I don't believe is good. So therefore, civil disobedience. Is that okay with you? Because then by that logic, we have no society. Society is gone at this point.
The difference.
We had to have a voluntary society.
No.
Justin,
you can't have any society.
Justin, the difference is that a tax law was not arbitrarily declared by the governor with no hearings, no input from the legislature on any of these details. That a tax law is something that the people have agreed to. The people did not agree to stay locked down. Well, I know, fine. But people did not, the people of Texas, the people of Illinois, the people of Wisconsin, the people of Minnesota, and even the people there with you in North Carolina did not agree to stay locked down indefinitely until the governor decides it's okay for you to go outside of your house based on, on an emergency that has no exit strategy, has no end game, has no end point. And when people can see for themselves that this disease is only affecting, to the large degree, in a fatal way, people that are extremely elderly in nursing homes, that is a huge mitigating factor, which might motivate a salon owner to say, this is madness. I am going broke. My employers are going broke. They need to feed their kids. I'm opening up my damn salon. For you not to be on the side of the salon owner, Justin, I think it's with all of that in context, I think is actually gobsmacking. And I can't wait to read the comments under this YouTube video.
You're wrong. They did. Because they voted to give the governor the power to do this in these kinds of circumstances. If you don't like the fact that the governor has this power, then it exists because the people did elect representatives that did put in a law that did give the governor that power. You keep saying he doesn't have that power. He does. They did elect it. They voted for that. You make it sound like that didn't happen. It did happen. That's the point. So if it's a bad law,
I agree with Dustin on
this. It's a bad law. It's bad. It's a terrible law, but it is the law. And it was put into place by a democratic society.
Fine.
So that's the situation.
And it is a responsibility of a free people to oppose those laws, just like as Isaac has said, whenever possible. And I think you should be a little bit more sympathetic to the person openly defying these unconstitutional, un-American activities that are going on with
They're
these
not
governors.
Unconstitutional. That's totally false.
Violation.
Which amendment to the Constitution does it violate? Which one? It doesn't violate any amendment to the Constitution. The states have the right to make all sorts of laws.
Isaac mentioned it. Fifth Amendment, or is it Fifth Amendment? The Takings Clause of the Constitution. If you deprive me of my right to earn a living, if you're depriving me, you said Justin that not letting someone operate their salon is not a takings. That business is my property. You're not allowing me to operate it. That is a takings. And that's one of the big things that's one of the big questions that's going to be going on in probably a much calmer way when all of this blows over. Is there are going to be a lot of businesses that are like, look, especially when it's not medically justified, you deprived me of my business. That is a big deal. I mean, if we compensate people, if you take a couple acres of land to build a road, but you can destroy somebody's entire business, something they built their entire lives, and there's no recourse for that. I think people need to push back on these things.
You might be right. You might be right. Maybe it is. I don't necessarily agree with that argument, but maybe that is the case. But what does that have to do with her just choosing not to follow the law? Like, is that how you get rid of amendment, laws that exist on the book? You just ignore them. So again, you guys keep dodging this question.
I mean, that's how the 18th Amendment got repealed, right?
Well, not necessarily. No, it's not. It was actually repealed. I mean, people
repealed it with their actions long before the government said, "Okay, this is a stupid."
That's very true, and that happens every time there's a regulation or law put into place, and that's happening now, and it's happened throughout the course of history.
So, like, at some point, to get the ball moving on this, people need to realize that the law is arbitrary, or it isn't serving the people in a way that it's supposed to, or it just doesn't work. So you have this process where people just ignore the law that doesn't work. And eventually you start to criminalize people for doing things that are totally fine. And let's just like air this right now. Like Texas just opened up all of their salons and stuff today. So like the point is kind of moot. We're arguing over spilt milk here for part of this, but that's all part of this process. Like
if that's true, then, and if that's the way that we need to handle every law we think is bad, then give me one reason why a libertarian person should pay their taxes. Can you give me one reason why they should do it? Because by the same exact logic, they shouldn't have to pay their taxes ever, because they think it's unjustified. They think it's a theft. Taxation is theft, right? Isn't every libertarian in the world running around saying that? Well, then by that logic, they shouldn't have to. Why should they allow the government to steal their property? By that logic, everyone should be able to ignore their taxes. And then any judge that drags someone in front of their court and says, you just violated the law openly, you chose not to pay your taxes for 10 years, you owe us all of this money, that person should be able to say, yep, and I'm justified in doing it, and I don't care what you have to say. Is that right? Like, is that the society that we're living in now? No, I mean, and to superimpose this kind of concept on the founding fathers is laughable. It is laughable and ridiculous. Do you want to go back and look at the local and state laws that they had in the 1700s and early 1800s and look at the punishments for those laws? They were throwing people in stocks back then for doing things much less than this. Did you know that they had compulsory church service, that you had to actually go to church in some states? And if you didn't, you had to pay a fine. And if you didn't pay that fine,
how do you think those laws changed?
How did they change?
Probably by people not bothering to go.
You're missing the point. The point is, you guys are making it sound like this is all wildly unconstitutional and that it's completely illegal, and it's not. It's completely in line.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that
it's not a violation. The founding fathers would have been totally permissible of this kind of thing without question. There's no doubt about it, because they gave great leeway to the states to make their own laws and determine what they're going to do in times of emergency. And so the idea that this is unconstitutional, that all the founding fathers would be opposed to this, that all of that, it's un-American. Like, that is just, to me, completely ridiculous. That it is not un-American.
No,
it's absolutely not un-American. It makes what's un-American, I guess, is trying to get her to apologize to the people who are supposedly the public servants. I agree with that. But if we're going to say that this is somehow, anyone can just violate any law they want if they think that it's unjustified, then I think that's absurd.
It's absurd that you think that's what the point that Isaac and I are making, that you should defy any law you don't like. No.
This is the point that I'm making.
Justin, this is a specific case. Now here, look, let me put some milk back in the glass. Maybe we'll spill that and argue about that later. So I'm going to talk about Illinois. I'm going to talk about
Zamboni this milk off the table and just
that's right
back into that glass.
I'm called the king of segues for a reason. So here in Illinois, supposedly the Governor Pritzker announced a 5-phase plan to get things back to normal or whatever. Supposedly we're in phase 2 right now. That's called the flattening. And it was supposed to, again, flatten the curve to not overrun our hospitals. But really, nothing had changed from phase 1, which is the outbreak of something, to phase 2, which, you can go golfing, you can go fishing. Or Pritzker says, quote, residents can begin enjoying additional outdoor activities.
Begin with the latest on the coronavirus pandemic.
We're going to have that. There we go. But yeah, Pritzker says, quote, residents can begin enjoying additional outdoor activities. Hey, thanks, boss. That's great. I didn't realize I was a prisoner to your whims. Getting to phase 3, again, it's vague. Quote, the rate of infection among those tested, the number of patients admitted to the hospital, and the number of patients needing ICU beds becomes stable or is declining, unquote. We're there right now, but we're not in phase 3. Pritzker says, maybe in a few weeks we'll get you to phase 3. I'll let you know. It'll be in the coming weeks. And when we get to phase 3, only then can, quote, manufacturing, offices, retail, barbershops, and salons reopen to the public with capacity and other limits and safety precautions. All gatherings will be limited to 10 or all gatherings limited to 10 or fewer people will be allowed in phase 3, which we are not yet in Illinois, right? And so then finally, after we get past that, we'll get to phase 4, which means gatherings of up to 50 people will be allowed. And quote, restaurants and bars reopen, travel resumes, golly, thank you, childcare and schools reopen. And it's only when we get to phase 5, which Pritzker calls Illinois restored, only then can we have conventions and festivals or events with more than 50 people in attendance. I would just like to know, what does that mean for a restaurant or bar, that they can't have more than 50 people in their place of business at any one time? Maybe it'll be something like that ridiculous farmers market you went to, Justin. And what about getting schools back together? What about a basketball game? I mean, just the players on the teams of both teams, the referees and the coaches, you're halfway to 50 already. So is that never going to happen either? And again, we only get to phase 5 if there's a vaccine or quote effective treatment widely available. The idea of a vaccine being developed anytime remotely soon is complete fantasy. We are here already. So this is, Justin, this is what I was talking about when I thought you might be on the side of a little bit more freedom here. These are arbitrary. Yes, the governor has the power to do it. The legislature should take it away. This should never happen again. But the governor is able to just make up arbitrary benchmarks for us to hit, maybe pretend we didn't hit those yet and keep these things going on indefinitely. You have to protest these things. You can't allow these things to continue. You can't just sit idly by and be compliant to this kind of abuse of power and arbitrary stuff. Again, this is a state of emergency. It's a state of emergency that the governor has decided is going to be lasting as long as he wants it to last. And that is happening in blue state after blue state after blue state. Isaac, am I making any sense, or is Justin making more sense here?
So Justin's going to say you have the right to protest this, and you should protest this. But until your protest is enough to persuade everyone else that you're right, that you should follow the law. Right, Justin? Is that basically what you were going to say?
Justin has left the building. Justin has left his chair. I don't know.
That's really funny. I could do my Justin impression, but that would just be shrill. Tom Brady left. The world is over.
Yes, you could do your Justin. I'm sure he'll be back to his microphone in a moment. But
yeah.
That's right. Exactly. That's right. But I mean, Isaac, I think this is the point that really exercised me, and looking at what our Illinois rules are. I don't know what they're like in Minnesota. I believe they're similar, just from reading what I can about what's happening in Minnesota. But it just seems to me a lot of these benchmarks are completely arbitrary. And again, in Illinois, the idea was to, phase 3, supposedly the rate of infection among those tested, the number of patients needing ICU beds is stable or declining. I mean, we're there right now, but the governor is still refusing to get to phase 3. It's that kind of, the abuse of this kind of emergency power that should be really troubling.
You could always say, well, we're not sure what what was the condition where these powers were enacted. Maybe it was World War II. Who knows, right? Is that what they intended when they passed it? Who knows? And we can never really know that. We just kind of have to work with what we're dealt right now. But yeah, I don't know, man. I think that this stuff is really bad. There was a barbershop here in St. Paul that decided that they were going to open up because, the small business loan has been just a fiasco. Nobody's been able to get them. So he opened up, then he gave 17 or 16 haircuts. 17th customer was the St. Paul Police Department. Guy faces up to $25,000 in fines. They haven't cited him, to their credit, but I don't know. I just think that this is really unfair, and you can sanitize it. You can take steps to limit the risk, but at some point, if two people are, voluntarily engaging in this commerce, then it's not the government's place to say, hey, that's not allowed.
Yeah. Well, Justin has returned. I hoped I was. I thought there was a slight. You're still on mute, Justin. I thought there was a slight possibility that my ranting got you so upset that you decided to walk off for good. But I see that it was just an emergency.
You would love to believe that. I know that your ranting is so good that it makes me run away and cry. I'm sure that's what you would love to believe. No, I had to go let my wife in so that I didn't get into trouble.
Oh, okay.
So
did you hear me outlining all of what Illinois is doing and how it's completely arbitrary? Okay.
So was that right?
Is he right that it's completely arbitrary?
No, but was my guess as to what you were going to say, correct?
I didn't hear that part.
Oh, I basically said all Justin's going to do is say, yes, you are right to protest that. That's your duty. You know, that's totally within your constitutional rights. But until that time where you can persuade enough people to change the politicians or have the politicians change the law, you need to follow the law. Unless
it's a clear violation of an existing law.
Please clap.
So if it's in other words, if it's overtly illegal on some basis, then I would say that, yeah, I mean, that you can have civil disobedience in certain circumstances. The religious liberty thing, I think, was a good example of that. I think you could have civil disobedience based on the idea that you have an existing law that already protects your religious liberty. But my point about the hair salon and about a whole bunch of other businesses is that no such law exists, in my opinion, that clearly protects those people from. It's not as though there's a conflict. It was within the governor's right because there was a law that was passed that gave the governor those powers. That may be a bad law, but it's the law. And in this case, it would be no different than that, right? Illinois, I'm sure, has some law that gives emergency powers to their governor. The governor is exercising those emergency powers. And so unless through the exercise of that power, some other law is being violated, then I would say what Isaac just said is the right way to handle it. If it is violating some other law, and I think you could make a case that the gathering of people part. Yeah. I mean, if you were going to make an argument, that I would say, like, you know, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, certainly freedom of assembly, you would think is. Well, you could argue
you could argue that for the customers of the salon too, right? Like they have the freedom to assemble wherever they want. So like,
I don't know. And to be honest, I'm not sure what the Supreme Court has ruled on freedom of assembly.
Yeah, no, I think
over time,
like a conversation on the constitutionality of all of this by people who are not qualified.
Right, and exactly, and in a lot of ways, it would probably be helpful to have a constitutional law scholar who's like an expert on the First Amendment or something deal with some of this stuff.
That can be arranged.
And maybe we should do that because I think these are important questions, and I don't think that it's always clear. I will say this though, as someone who has spent a lot of time reading Supreme Court cases, I will say that the Supreme Court itself makes up the law all the time.
Oh, for sure.
So if the Supreme Court wanted to rule that freedom of assembly includes, the people going to the hair salon, they certainly could do that. And they've done decisions like that before in the past. If they wanted to rule the opposite and give a very narrow view of freedom of assembly, they could do that. They've done that before. So, in a lot of ways, the Supreme Court just kind of does whatever it wants in a lot of respects. So I don't put a whole lot of stock into that. But the freedom of religion thing, I think, is so clear cut that makes it easy for me to say, okay, you clearly have a right to freedom of religion.
So what if they just said like cancer treatment was now illegal?
Well, it basically is. I mean,
sure. But like for this, like, let's get away from the freedom of religion thing because that has confounding layers to it, right? But we're never going to get off this, Andy. So I'm sorry, but like, would it be wrong? Let's say chemotherapy is illegal. Would it be wrong to find some place that was offering that service for you?
Well, that already is the case. The Heartland Institute is.
Would it be illegal? Would it be okay? So let's say you've made it illegal to get chemo. Would you personally? You have cancer. You need this to survive. Would you go get it, or would you follow the law? Like, would you find some place that was going to administer that treatment to you, or would you just die?
I would not follow the law in that case. Okay, obviously, yeah.
Okay. All right.
But if I got punished for it, I would understand that was the risk that I was taking when I chose not to follow the law.
Thank you.
No, I would say no. I wouldn't say thank you. I think you have to have a process for changing bad laws that doesn't just involve everyone ignoring the law.
Well, no, that's where it starts.
That's the point.
That's where it starts, and that's where it should start. And free people should be willing to do that and eager to do that. I mean, I want to bring this back to a couple things, and we're going to wrap up here pretty soon. But again, in Illinois, he says phase 5 will be Illinois restored, and we only get there if there's a vaccine or effective treatment widely available. Meanwhile, there are millions of people who have this virus and will get this virus and will not need any treatment whatsoever. So, scientifically, this is not based on science. These emergency powers are not based on science. They're based on a desire to wield power over the citizenry, and governors like Pritzker and Cuomo in New York, and what's his face, Gavin Newsom in California and other places, they seem to really be enjoying this. They're exploiting this. This is a crisis that they don't want to go to waste. And this is not scientifically or medically necessary. To segue a little bit into the scientist, if you want to call him that, from the United Kingdom, Neil Ferguson, it was his modeling of what deaths would be like in the United States and other countries around the world. He predicted 2 million Americans would die from Corona 19. And it is going to be nowhere near that amount. And then, of course, he revises it. Yet it is these people, these leaders, these elites who put out these reports and who rule over us that are actually just not applying these rules to themselves at all. Neil Ferguson was caught being with his mistress, let's say, several times over at his house. So he was not even adhering to the social distancing. I don't think you can have an affair with a married woman and still be socially distancing unless you want to do it by text. And that's not what they were doing. So his personal life, seems as poorly disciplined as his science is. And if the people that are telling us to lock down are not applying the rules to themselves or not following those rules themselves, J.B. Pritzker's wife flew on a private jet to Florida, their mansion down in Florida. She couldn't stay in Illinois. It is when you see these things happen, when you see that the predictions of 2 million deaths is actually way, way less than that, when you see that it is the elderly in nursing homes that are most at risk, and that most of us that will contract COVID-19 will not even show any symptoms, let alone need treatment. When you put all of that together, Justin, these emergency powers are being abused and people's lives are being ruined while they don't apply these same things to themselves. Isaac, you go first with this. I saw you nodding a couple times, which is nice.
Oh, wasn't it Adam Smith that laws need to be respectable in order to be respected?
I believe so.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that just kind of all goes back to this. Like, if the law is not serving the people aren't going to follow it. So, I mean, really, this is kind of the conversation that we have quite often, that the laws are a trailing indicator of public opinion, and people vote with their feet more often than they get to vote at the ballot box. So that's exactly what this is.
Yeah, I don't disagree that people are going to engage in civil disobedience, ignore laws that they don't like. All I'm saying is that to argue that doing that is somehow illegal is, not their disobedience, but the governor's action is illegal.
Oh, I don't say it's illegal. I say it's wrong.
I think it is wrong. You can make the argument that it is wrong, but and I started that off by saying you can say a law is a bad law, an ineffective law, an immoral law. You can say all kinds of things, but if it's legal, then it's legal. It's that, and I'm not saying you can't ignore laws. Like Isaac pointed out, people ignore laws all the time when they're driving down the highway. No, I was not. What I said, what I said was, if you ignore the law and you get caught, then you have to deal with the repercussions of that and not act as though somehow you are being treated by this illegal city. You weren't. You made the decision to ignore an existing law that you knew was the law. So you pay the penalty for doing that. And that's part of civil disobedience. That's a big part of it, is paying the penalty for the law that you just violated. The idea that you shouldn't have to, or that it's somehow un-American that someone who violates the law be held accountable for violating the law by the people who are job it is to enforce laws, to me is ridiculous. The law is a bad law. It may even be an immoral law. We may need to get rid of the law. But to say that we shouldn't punish people who actually break that law, to me, doesn't make sense.
We one of Richard, I believe this quote was from Richard Nixon, and he said, if the president does it, it's not illegal, or something to that effect. And we seem to have governors right now saying, well, if I say it, it's legal. If I declare it, if I decree it, it's now the law, it's now legal. And we should not ever have to put up with that standard. There should be, especially again, when it's not scientifically or medically necessary. We are imprisoning millions of people.
Great.
The unemployment rate just came out today. The unemployment rate just came out today. We have 33 million people unemployed in this country. The unemployment rate is 14%, 14.4%. That's the highest rate since the Great Depression. That was some 85 years ago now. And actually, the Bureau of Labor Statistics said we should add in another 5%. Because the 14.4% unemployment rate doesn't actually include people who have been furloughed from their jobs and probably won't go back, but haven't gone to work and haven't been officially laid off yet. That because of that. But it took 2 years after the stock market crash of 1929 to get to above 14.4% unemployment. We did it in 2 months. And in January, we had a roaring economy with full employment, and 33 million people are instantly out of work. And a lot of it, almost all of it, is not medically or scientifically justified. And it is because these governors have decided to destroy the economy and keep everybody imprisoned in their homes. This is not tenable. This is not America.
Justin's got himself into a little loophole here, Jim, though. Like he's going to say, yeah, you know what? I agree that this all is really bad and they probably shouldn't have done that. But until they decide not to do it anymore, it's just kind of the way things are. Look at me.
Yeah. You know what? To some extent, Isaac is right.
No, I'm exactly right.
Look.
Because you're like, oh, well, I don't agree with any of this stuff, and I think it should change. But shame on the people who are actually taking some sort of personal risk.
Once again, you guys are putting words into my mouth. I am not saying that her civil disobedience is in any way wrong. What I'm saying is that if you engage in civil disobedience and get punished for it, then that's part of the deal. And there's nothing illegal or un-American about that aspect of it. To say that enforcing an existing law is un-American makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. If this same exact situation were happening in 1800, I guarantee that you would have states cracking down even with even harsher punishments than putting someone in jail for 7 days. I mean, the idea that again, you guys are conflating whether something is bad, it's a bad law, and whether, that means because it's a bad law, it magically isn't a law anymore. I agree with everything. I agree that many of these powers that the governors have are bad, and that the laws that give the governors power to do these things are bad laws. So change those laws. Right? Change those laws. That's the whole point. They're bad laws. But don't say that they're illegal. They're not illegal. They're perfectly legal. That's what the law gives them the power to do.
But you're just saying people should have to suffer through the bad law until the law is changed. Is basically what you're saying.
And essentially, I suppose so. Yeah, that's how every law exists.
That's all
Should you have to pay 20% of your money to taxes that the government then turns around and wastes? Should you have to do that? Isn't that a bad law, Isaac?
Yeah, it's an incredibly bad law.
It's a bad law.
So should you? I don't ignore it. Is because you'll
get punished, right?
Yes, and to me,
exactly. That's my point.
Yeah,
that's right. So if you stop punishing people for violating the law, then they'll just all violate the law, right? And now you have anarchy. So you have to
oh my God! So
either
we do exactly what Governor J.B. Pritzker says at all times indefinitely, or we have anarchy. I mean, come on, Justin.
Okay. So how do you pick and choose which laws to follow and which laws not to follow?
Because this is a question that people have been trying to answer for more than 400 years. Probably since the dawn of human time. And that is all the time we have. So thank you for listening to the In the Tank podcast. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at In the Tank podcast. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Twitter.
Look for the big, beautiful blue check mark. Jim Lakely, thanks for being on the show. Where can the fine people find you?
They can find me at Jay Lakely on Twitter, at heartland.org, and Heartland Inst on Twitter. And I must say, this conversation was a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be because Justin was wrong the whole time. So conflict is good.
And Isaac, where can the fine people find you? Oh, thanks, Donald. The people can find me at The Fracking Guy on Twitter or at AmericanExperiment.org. Well, that's all we have for this episode. Make sure to tune in next week.
We'll do it live.
All right, definitely end on that.